In today's episode, I'll talk about three very interesting stories. In the first story, I'll talk about why Qualcomm is so interested in buying Intel and what is really happening there. In the second one, I'll talk about India's green energy transition, the opportunities there, and what is exactly happening. And in the third and final story of the day, I'll talk about whether or not India can really become the next China for the world. Welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha, where our aim is to bring to you news in a way that is one level deeper than traditional news channels. I'm your host Anurag Bansal. Today is Wednesday, the 25th of September. Let's begin with the first story and discuss why Qualcomm is so interested in buying Intel. According to recent reports, Qualcomm, which is the giant behind mobile chips, has reached out to Intel about a possible takeover. Believe it or not, we are talking about the same Intel that once practically ruled all PC chips worldwide. Now, if this deal does happen, it'll be huge. But nothing is official right now and no offers have been made yet. But still, just the fact that this topic is even being discussed today says a lot about how much Intel has fallen. So the question here is, what is exactly going on with Intel and how did a company that once ruled the chip world end up in this position? Let me explain. See, Intel has had 7 straight quarters of falling sales. In August, Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger announced 15,000 job cuts. If that is not bad enough, they even scrapped their dividends. Intel's situation is a classic case of bad decisions and missed opportunities. First, Intel missed out on the mobile revolution. When the world was going crazy for smartphones, Intel was still focused on PCs. They even turned down Apple's offer to work on the iPhone back in the day. But the smartphone miss is not their only mistake. Gelsinger himself has admitted to two other big blunders. First, Intel cancelled a GPU built for AI back in 2010. In hindsight now, that decision might have cost them big time in today's AI race. And second, Intel was too focused on building their foundry business. This distracted them from other key opportunities that came their way. Then there's also the whole AI chip situation that we are in right now. While companies like Nvidia were building GPUs that would become the backbone of AI computing, Intel stuck to their old school CPUs. The result was Intel having to play catch up all this while. To give you some more context, this year Intel expects to make around 500 million US dollars from its AI chips. Now I know that sounds like a big number until you hear Nvidia's numbers. Nvidia makes 20 billion US dollars not every year but every quarter from its AI chips. So Intel is only a droplet in Nvidia's ocean in a manner of speaking. By the way, for those of you who do not know what GPUs exactly are, let me give you some very quick context. GPU stands for Graphics Processing Unit, and they were originally built to handle graphics for video games. But it turns out the same technology that is great for processing millions of pixels is also brilliant for crunching massive amounts of data that is needed for AI. Now back to Intel, one of their biggest problems was perhaps deciding to do everything in-house instead of opting for the fabless model that the rest of the industry was using. I'll explain what this means. Look, back in the day, chip companies designed and manufactured their own chips. But then in the late 90s and early 2000s, a new model emerged called the fabless model. Basically, fabless companies focused on only designing chips and let someone else handle the manufacturing part. This approach let companies focus on innovation without the huge cost of running factories. Nvidia and Qualcomm are perfect examples of successful fabless companies. They design their chips and let foundries like TSMC handle the manufacturing part. It is faster, more flexible, and also allows them to use the latest manufacturing processes from a specific manufacturer. On the other hand, Intel stuck to its very old ways. It did everything in-house, and all of it was working fine only until things started to crash down. When Intel started having manufacturing issues in the mid-2010, its whole business unit took a hit. Unlike fabless companies, it just could not switch to a better manufacturer. What is worse for Intel is that this manufacturing slip-up opened doors for its old rival AMD to make a comeback. And once AMD had a foot in their door, they did not let it go. Intel also fell behind in the nanometer race. See, in chip making, the smaller the chip is, the more powerful and efficient it is. But Intel just could not keep up with dedicated companies like TSMC and Samsung in the race to make the smallest chips. But now the big question is it all over for Intel? See, Intel's current CEO, Pat Gelsinger, took over as CEO in 2021. Ever since then, he has been trying to turn things around. He has opened up Intel's factories to other companies in order to try and catch up in the AI race. He even partnered with Intel's longtime competitor ARM because ARM's designs account for half of the world's foundry revenue. But that said, fixing Intel is no small task for obvious reasons. Given the kind of trouble that they are in, things will take a lot of time, and even then, there is no guarantee they will succeed. Intel's numbers also do not look great. Since Gelsinger announced his turnaround plan in 2021, Intel's stock has dropped by 60%. For the first time since at least 1981, Intel is now trading below its book value. And that is a huge fall for a company that used to have its Intel Inside stickers on nearly every single computer in the world. Now, the Qualcomm Intel deal happens, it could be the biggest tech acquisition in the world. But a few major hurdles will need to be crossed before it becomes a reality. First, the regulators. See, antitrust concerns are already a big deal in technology today, and combining two big giants like Qualcomm and Intel will definitely raise a lot of eyebrows. Second, there's also the question of money. See, Intel's market cap was around 93 billion US dollars after the news broke out. That is a lot of cash, even for a company as big as Qualcomm. And finally, there is also the political side of things. Chips are more than just a business today. They are also a national security issue. The US government has been pushing to bring chip manufacturing back to America. Now, how they will react to this deal is anyone's guess. Moving on to the second story, let's understand how India is doing with respect to its green transition. Look, India is at a very exciting point in its energy journey right now. Our country has big plans to ramp up our power infrastructure over the next 10 odd years, and the numbers are massive. According to a report by Motilal Oswal, India will need to more than double its power capacity by 2032, taking it from 442 gigawatts to a whopping 900 gigawatts. But it's not just about adding more power, it is also about creating a future-proof energy mix that is sustainable as well as ready for what is coming ahead. Now, to make all of this happen, we are talking about an investment of about 40 lakh crores. Now, as you can imagine, that is a huge number, and most of that, about 86%, will be put into generating and transmitting energy. And the rest will go towards things like smart meters, which will help make power grids more efficient. Now, this investment is all about moving from coal and switching to renewable sources like solar and wind, which are expected to take up more than half of India's energy mix by 2032. So the question is, what is driving all these changes? Look, it's not just about where India is getting its power from. It is also about how we use it. See, right now, coal dominates India's energy mix, but by 2032, its share is expected to drop to below 30%. And this leaves a lot more room for renewables to step in. And it's not just power plants that are making the shift. The way we use electricity is also changing very fast. Industries and households are now using more energy than they ever did in history. Two big sectors that will drive a lot of this demand are electric vehicles or EVs and data centers. Now, these two alone are expected to account for one third of India's power consumption growth by 2035. Just think about it. Data centers are expected to grow by a staggering 30% every single year, and EVs are set to take over, especially in the two-wheeler market. By 2035, 60% of new two-wheelers sold are expected to be electric, and EVs overall will account for about 17% of India's power consumption. As household incomes rise, more and more people will buy energy-hungry appliances like air conditioners, which are growing at about 6% every year. All these factors are pushing India's power demand through the roof, in a manner of speaking. Now, none of this is happening in isolation. India's power demand is growing hand in hand with our economy. If our GDP keeps growing at about 7% annually, power demand is expected to rise by 7 to 9% every single year over the next one decade. Now, this is similar to what we saw in China in the early 2000s, where booming economic growth led to a massive surge in power consumption. So, if history is anything to go by, India is headed for a big jump in energy usage in the coming few years. Now, the shift towards renewables will definitely not be possible without the government's push. Several policies are in place in order to boost solar and wind energy, like the Renewable Purchase Obligation, which requires power distribution companies to buy a certain portion of their energy from renewables. There is also the PLI, or the Production Linked Incentive Scheme for solar PV manufacturing, which is designed to reduce India's dependence on imports. The goal is to hit 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030, which is up from the current 192 gigawatts. Now, this change will be really crucial if India truly wants to meet its energy needs sustainably. But here is the thing, producing renewable energy is only a part of a puzzle. We also need to figure out how to get all that clean energy to the people who need it. That is where transmission and distribution or T&D upgrades come into the picture. See, India will need to invest about 4 lakh crores in T&D infrastructure to integrate renewables into the grid smoothly. Power Grid Corporation of India, for example, is looking at a 2 lakh crore rupee capex opportunity to ramp up the country's high voltage transmission systems. These upgrades are essential in order to ensure that solar and wind energy generated in remote areas can successfully reach urban centers and industries where it is really needed the most. Now, with such a massive transformation underway, some companies are better positioned than others to benefit here. Power Grid Corporation of India is definitely a one to watch out here. They are at the forefront of transmission upgrades with that big 2 lakh crore rupee capex opportunity ahead of them. JSW Energy is one more big player that is set to benefit from the renewable energy boom. They plan to expand their capacity 2.4 times in the next few years, and they aim for 20 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030, most of which will be in renewables. Then there's, of course, Tata Power, which is undergoing a massive shift right now. Over the next 5 years, 45% of its capital expenditure will be directed towards renewable projects. By 2027, it aims for 90% of its core earnings to come from renewables. NTPC is also in the game, and they are expanding renewable portfolios through its arm NGEL, which is set to go public in 2025. Now, this IPO could provide a very good boost to NTPC's overall business. Now, of course, all of this is not at all smooth sailing. There are plenty and plenty of challenges ahead, especially when it comes to execution. For instance, transmission bottlenecks in states like Rajasthan are already causing delays in some renewable projects. There is also the issue of rising competition in the solar and wind sectors, which could squeeze margins for some companies. Add to this the volatility in commodity prices, and you've got a very, very challenging landscape in order to navigate. But with strong government support, ambitious goals, and a host of companies positioned to lead the way, India's green energy transition is definitely an opportunity to keep a big eye on. Now, let's move on to the third and the last story of the day and talk about whether India can really become the next China for the world. Look, recently, Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of JP Morgan, did an interview with CNBC TV 18. In it, he talked about the big semiconductor deal between India and the US, India's role in the global supply chain, and attracting foreign investments. Now, the first question I'm sure you probably have here is, why should you care about what this guy is saying? Look, here's the thing. Jamie Dimon is not just a random person. He's the head of the world's fifth largest bank. So when he speaks, it is worth paying attention to what he says. So let me break down the key points from his chat and why they really matter to us. Dimon first spoke about the semiconductor deal between the US and India. Now, this is important because semiconductors are not just for powering our phones anymore, they are also essential for everything from military hardware to telecom networks. And right now, China dominates the global semiconductor market, which puts countries like the US in a very, very tricky spot. Now, with geopolitical tensions rising, whether related to trade or tech or national security, the US is looking to diversify its supply chain, and that is where India comes in. The newly announced deal is a big step in reducing that over-reliance on China. Dimon said, and I quote, "The world cannot rely on just one country for something as critical as semiconductors." The US and India are teaming up to build a semiconductor fab, or basically a chip making factory in India. This fab will be built in partnership with Bharat Semi, Third Eye Tech, and even the US Space Force. These chips will not just power our gadgets anymore, they will also go into military and telecom equipment and ensure both countries have a secure source of these critical technologies. For India, this deal could be an absolute game changer because it positions India as a reliable alternative to China. This is a key part of India's broader goal of becoming a big player in global manufacturing, especially as more countries adopt to the China plus one strategy, where they're looking for alternatives to China for production. Now, moving on, Dimon also talked about industrial policy, particularly when it comes to national security. He said that while protecting critical industries like semiconductors is smart, one has to also be very careful. Over-regulations can in a way choke innovation. In other and simpler words, Dimon is saying that it is good to protect sectors that are important for national security, but if you go overboard with rules and bureaucracy, you can slow down progress. If India plays its cards right, the semiconductor deal could set the tone for how our country balances economic growth with national security. Next up, Demond also touched upon something everyone has been talking about, which is the global supply chain realignment. In other words, companies are trying to reduce their dependence on China, and India is emerging as a very solid alternative. With big companies like Apple shifting production away from China, India is positioning itself as a serious player in this space. But of course, this is not happening overnight. For industries like semiconductors, it could take as many as 10 to 15 years to fully transition away from China. But still, India has momentum on its side. Demon said that India needs to keep investing in infrastructure and make sure it stays business friendly. The semiconductor fab is just one piece of the puzzle. If India can keep up its current momentum, there is huge opportunity for it to become a major player in global supply chains. Finally, Dimon also discussed one of India's biggest challenges, which is attracting foreign direct investments or FDI. See, despite all the progress India has made, FDI into the country has dropped by 43% in 2023. Now, this is a huge decline, and this is not just because of economic conditions. Dimon pointed out that while India has improved its business environment, investors still have concerns about things like policy shifts and regulatory unpredictability. Long story short, investors need to feel confident when they are putting money into a country, and right now, India is still working on building upon that trust. Demon also mentioned the interesting fact that India tends to favor homegrown companies, which can make foreign investors a little nervous. It's not just about economic policies, it is also about ensuring the business environment is stable and a little more predictable. As a bottom line, as per Demon, India has a massive potential, but it needs to build confidence with international investors in order to grow. The overall goal should be to make doing business in India as smooth and transparent as possible. Now, moving on to the last section of the day, which is a small tiny tidbits. First, SpiceJet has raised 3,000 crore rupees through a qualified institutional placement or QIP and an additional 736 crore rupees from an earlier funding round in order to stabilize its operations after a steep drop in market share. These funds will help the airline regain ground in India's fiercely competitive aviation industry. Second, MobiKwik and Vari Energies have received SEBI approval to launch their respective IPOs. They aim to raise 700 and 3,000 crore rupees respectively. MobiKwik is planning to fuel their growth in the fintech space, while Vari Energies is targeting expansion in the renewable energy sector. Third, India's latest oil and gas bid round saw major companies like ONGC and Vedanta participate. This covered 28 blocks. The government aims to boost domestic energy production and reduce the country's 222 billion US dollar oil import bill. Fourth, Silicon Auto has launched a new R&D center in Bangalore to focus on developing semiconductors for EVs and autonomous driving vehicles. This aligns with Foxconn's larger plans of expanding into EV production in India. Fifth, Byju's has lost control of its US subsidiary, Byju's Alpha Incorporated, after a Delaware court upheld a 1.2 billion US dollar loan default. This ruling further complicates Byju's financial struggles and hampers its global expansion efforts. Sixth and the last one, JSW Group is considering reallocating its 40,000 crore rupee EV and battery project from Odisha to Maharashtra due to changes in state leadership. Potential new sites for the project include Aurangabad and Nagpur. That's all the news and stories I have for you today. I hope you found value in this episode. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care and goodbye. Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.